Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump unveiling a new 25% tariff on all foreign-made cars. How it's expected to impact car prices and what the president says he's trying to achieve. Iris Tao at the White House. Lawmakers grill intelligence chiefs for a second consecutive day, with Republicans and Democrats concerned about starkly different national security issues. Luis Martinez on Capitol Hill. Immigration authorities in Massachusetts detain a student from Turkey and revoke her visa. This as U.S. officials are abroad to strengthen the fight against illegal immigration. Irian Pazdar has the immigration update. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Israel could seize land in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, residents in the territory continue protesting against Hamas. Jason Perry reports. A subcommittee in the Senate takes a look at China's predatory behavior in the Western Hemisphere against Taiwan's allies. Jason Blair with the key takeaways from that hearing. And a Biden administration gun rule will continue after the Supreme Court today ruled that guns made from kits, also known as ghost guns, should be regulated. Our legal correspondent explains the ruling.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump announces a 25% tariff on foreign-made cars that's set to go into effect in a week. While he says it'll bring jobs and lower prices, automakers could face higher production costs. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What's in the announcement today?
Good evening to you as well, Tiff. So tonight, President Trump inside the Oval Office announced that he's putting a 25% new tariffs on all cars that are not made in the U.S. And that's going to go into effect on April 2nd, the same day that his new reciprocal tariffs are set to go into effect. And President Trump says that the goal of his new auto tariffs are to push companies to come to the U.S., build plants here, and manufacture right here in the country. And that's also to expand existing plants for the companies who want to avoid tariffs if they actually produce here. And here's what Trump said about it today. Watch.
So we'll effectively be charging a 25% tariff. But if you build your car in the United States, there is no tariff. And what that means is a lot of foreign car companies, a lot of companies are going to be in great shape because they've already built their plant.
And just earlier this week, South Korean car maker Hyundai announced a $20 billion new investment in the U.S. over the next 4 years, including a new steel plant in Louisiana that will create thousands of jobs. And President Trump says one of the effects of the new tariffs will be new jobs inside the U.S., and he also says prices are going to come down. His aide further says that the new tariffs will bring in a revenue of $100 billion per year into the U.S. And the U.S. currently imports about $400 billion worth of automotive products in 2024. And those exporters of cars to the U.S. include, for example, our allies in Mexico, Japan, South Korea, and Canada. Back to you.
And Iris, on the new auto tariffs, what are some other potential implications in addition to companies now feeling the pressure to move production to the U.S.?
Sure. So one of the obvious impact on the car makers will be potentially increased production costs. We know that while the tariffs are set to hit foreign car makers the most, but our domestic car makers, including the big three automakers, they still have parts manufactured in our ally countries like Canada and Mexico. I mean, what President Trump did say today during the press conference, so that if the parts of the cars are made in America and the car isn't those parts, then they won't be taxed. So it remains to be seen how the specifics will be rolled out in the coming days. But we also remember that the last time Trump announced tariffs on most of the Canadian and Mexican products, he did give a break of those to specifically a car maker, saying that he doesn't want to hurt American domestic car makers and manufacturers. So, of course, we still got a week or so until the tariffs are actually set to go into effect. So it remains to be seen if any negotiations will happen during this period period, and if Trump potentially could roll some of it back or even give some exemptions to some of the car companies that he expressed concerns about before. Back to you.
And Iris, before I let you go, did the president respond further today to the Signal chat leak? What's the White House saying?
Sure. So during the press conference, President Trump again called it a witch hunt, saying that the media pretty much hyped it up, although the main story should be the success of the U.S. strikes against the Houthi terrorists. And he further said that he thinks Signal could be, quote, defective. And that comes as the White House today told us that the White House counsel's office, the National Security Council, as well as experts brought in by Elon Musk, are looking into how that reporter got into that chat group in the first place. Tiff.
All right, Iris, thanks for those updates. The chiefs of the intelligence community returned to the Hill today, this time appearing before the House Intelligence Committee to provide their annual worldwide threats assessment. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on the story.
Yesterday, our colleagues on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence held their hearing on the annual threat assessment, and unfortunately, instead of exploring the real and existential threats that face our nation, which is the purpose of this hearing, this issue consumed most of their time.
Despite calls from House Republicans to focus the annual threat assessment hearing on the report produced by the intelligence community, House Democrats followed in line with Senate Democrats and grilled intelligence chiefs over reports of alleged mishandling of classified information.
So it's your testimony that less than 2 weeks ago, you were on a Signal chat that had all of this information about F-18s and MQ-9 Reapers and targets on strike, and you in that 2-week period simply forgot that that was there. That's your testimony?
My testimony is I did not recall the exact details of what was included there.
You've reasserted that there was no classified information. I think we can all agree that that information shouldn't have been out there. But let me ask you this. Are you familiar with the ODNI's classification guidance?
I'm familiar.
I've actually got a copy right here. If I read you a part of that guidance, I wonder if you could tell me what the level of classification indicated is.
Other House Democrats focused on what was not on the report and potential impacts of funding cuts to USAID.
Coupled with the administration's cuts to USAID and other international assistance, particularly health and humanitarian assistance, won't these reductions and eliminations increase regional instability and volatility in areas already at high risk for threats? Was the IC consulted at all in the decisions to eliminate such critical funding, and why weren't these risks included in this year's report?
Republican lawmakers focused their line of questioning on the actions that U.S. adversaries are taking in the Western Hemisphere.
We're concerned about encroachment in the Western Hemisphere, not just by China, but other adversaries like Russia and Iran, from Russian military cooperation with and support to Venezuela and Nicaragua, CCP-linked companies, acquisition of critical assets in Central and South America, Iran's defense agreement with Bolivia, the establishment of a technical military cooperation commission, including Venezuela, Cuba, China, Russia, and Iran. And I could list several more alarming examples.
It is important to note that the U.S. Secretary of State designates as U.S. adversaries all those state actors and non-state actors that engage in a long-term pattern of activities that are adverse to U.S. national security. Currently, that list is topped by the Chinese Communist Party, Russia, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, and North Korea. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
A federal appeals court panel today denied the Trump administration's attempt to remove a lower court's block on deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. In a 2-1 decision, the court rejected all of the government's arguments for immediate relief, including that the judge didn't have the authority to review the matter under the act. Judge Karen Henderson wrote a concurring statement for the court, saying the Trump administration misused the act, which is intended to be used only during times of war, and that the administration misread the act's language about an invasion, saying it means an attack without conquest. The court said the administration didn't show a likelihood of success on the merits, so the block on deportations stays in place. Federal immigration authorities detaining a student from Turkey and revoking her visa. This as U.S. officials are traveling abroad to strengthen partnerships in the fight against illegal immigration. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar is in Latin America with the immigration update.
Homeland Security Secretary Noem on Wednesday traveling to El Salvador. The country houses a maximum security prison, which holds alleged gang members. Some of them have been deported from the U.S. Noem is set to visit the prison on Wednesday before meeting with President Nayib Bukele later on the same day. She's also scheduled to visit Colombia and Mexico after her stop in El Salvador. Noem previously laid out what she hopes to achieve during her meetings with the heads of state of those countries.
Building these relationships so that we can continue to get people out of this country that don't belong here and take them home.
And Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in the Caribbean on Wednesday. He'll also address illegal immigration, narco-trafficking, and more. Now, these trips abroad come as U.S. officials also keep tackling illegal immigration at home in the U.S. Late on Tuesday, immigration authorities arrested a PhD student near Boston. Turkish citizen Rümeysa Öztürk studies at Tufts University and has previously engaged in pro-Palestine activities on campus. This video appears to show the arrest of the student, who seems to be in distress. 6 Homeland Security agents with covered faces took her phone as she yelled and was handcuffed. An attorney for the student says she has been wrongfully detained without explanation. A district judge has now decided that the student should not be moved out of Massachusetts for now. Last year, Öztürk criticized the university for not cutting ties with companies that have connections to Israel. This comes less than 3 weeks after a Columbia University student was arrested, a case that made national headlines. Mahmoud Khalil is accused of supporting the terrorist organization Hamas. Khalil denies the accusations. Secretary Rubio says certain students shouldn't have been allowed to enter the U.S. to begin with.
If you told us, I'm going to America not just to study at your university, but to tear up your campus, we would have never let you in. And if you do that, once you come into the United States, we're going to kick you out.
Rubio did not specifically mention either Khalil or Öztürk in his remarks. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that if Hamas does not give up the hostages, then Israel could seize land in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, residents in the territory are continuing to protest against Hamas for the second day in a row. NTD's Jason Parry has the latest.
On Wednesday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel may seize territory in the Gaza Strip.
The more Hamas persists in its refusal to release our hostages, the more powerful the pressure we will exert. And I say to Hamas, this includes seizing territory, and this includes other things that I will not list here.
His comments come after President Trump recently walked back his suggestion that the United States could take over the Gaza Strip and have residents leave the territory. Now it appears that Israel could be the country that takes over at least part of the Gaza Strip. Israel's defense minister also reiterated the issue.
Hamas is endangering your lives and will cause you to lose your homes and more territory that will be annexed to the Israeli defense system.
He also referenced the recent protests that took place in the northern Gaza Strip.
Learn from the residents of Beit Lahia, and you too demand the removal of Hamas from Gaza and the immediate release of all Israeli hostages. This is the only way to stop the war.
And on the same day, residents in the area were seen protesting again. One of the protesters called on Israel to stop the war, and he also said this.
The second message is to Hamas, the government of Hamas. Brothers, we've had enough. I swear to God, we're tired. There's nothing. There is no house to stay, no food, no salary, no family members remaining. I have become disabled. Up until this point, it's enough.
This comes as Israeli forces are keeping up the pressure against Hamas terrorists. They reported striking multiple launch sites and also a terrorist who launched projectiles towards Israel. Meanwhile, in Israel, protesters blocked traffic as many people have been voicing their frustrations with their government's latest actions inside and outside the country.
We need to bring all the hostages. That's the most important thing that we need to do these days, to bring home 59 hostages.
They forgot the hostages. We are demonstrating and going from here to Jerusalem to demonstrate in front of Prime Minister Netanyahu's house.
Netanyahu vowed to return the hostages, but many wanted them to be released in a ceasefire deal and say that returning to war is abandoning the hostages. Jason Parry, NTD News.
Coming up, a subcommittee in the Senate takes a look at China's predatory behavior in the Western Hemisphere against Taiwan's allies. And the CEOs of NPR and PBS are on Capitol Hill this afternoon. Republicans accuse the outlets of biased reporting. The question at hand, should tax dollars fund public media? Melina Weisskopf reports after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A Senate subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere looks at what the Chinese Communist Party has been doing against Taiwan's allies in the Western Hemisphere. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports from Washington, D.C.
Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee examined China's influence in the Western Hemisphere with a focus on Taiwan's allies. Subcommittee Chair Senator John Curtis says that it's in the United States' best interest to push back against Beijing's coercion in the area and to continue to support the nations that continue to stand with Taiwan.
State Department officials have rightfully likened China's approach in our region to the 19th century imperialism, bribing local leaders with investments in ways that lead to debt dependency.
Ranking member Senator John Keynes says that China is aggressively moving into the region.
Not only is the PRC trying to box us into a corner in our own neighborhood, they're also really coming hard after Taiwan's diplomatic partners, often at the cost of prosperity and good governance. The PRC's tactics in the region bring significant corruption, economic degradation, environmental challenge, and we've seen that again and again.
Senator Keynes says the Chinese Communist Party has been disrupting commercial exchanges with countries like Guatemala as a means to coerce them into complying with their policies with Taiwan, which the CCP claims to be their own territory.
So there can be short-term gains for some nations in doing this, but often at the cost of long-term stability and prosperity.
And the distinction between the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people also came up more than once during the hearing.
Oftentimes when we have these conversations, it feels like we're talking about the Chinese people, and I want to be really clear. I think Americans love the Chinese people, love the Chinese culture. That's not where our problem is. It's an authoritarian government that's more oppressive on its own people than anyone else. I just think that's really important to designate.
One witness detailed some ways the CCP supports other authoritarian governments in the Western Hemisphere.
China also props up authoritarian regimes such as Venezuela, not only through loans, but also through systems that support repression, including riot control vehicles and facial recognition cameras for tracking down protesters.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Should taxpayer dollars be used to fund public media? That's the heart of the question of a hearing on Capitol Hill today. The Oversight Committee's Doge panel is probing the CEOs of NPR and PBS. Republicans accuse the outlets of reporting bias in favor of Democrats, while Democrats say there are bigger issues at hand that should take priority. NTD's Melina Weisskopf reports.
Amid mounting skepticism about content published on publicly funded NPR and PBS News, the company's CEOs are on Capitol Hill today.
You have 87 registered Democrats, not a single Republican in your editor boards. I mean, how does that work to give us the perception that you're doing your job of actually delivering unbiased information?
Well, I would agree with you that that number is a concern if it is accurate. I do believe that we need to have journalists who represent the full breadth of the American society so that we can report well for all Americans.
Democrats railed against the hearing, saying it lacks focus on what they say are more consequential issues at hand.
And if Republicans were serious about investigating waste, fraud, and abuse, my colleagues would admit that Big Bird is not the problem. Big tech is, big pharma is, big insurance companies are. Elon Musk's companies make billions, $3 billion a year off of government contracts. That's 6 times the money that goes to all of public broadcasting.
There's a lot we should be discussing right now at this hearing. We've, of course, had some pretty shocking security breaches that we're just learning about through a lot of our national security officials. We know that Pete Hegseth should be removed from office or should resign. We have Donald Trump, who, of course, is crashing the stock market.
Several Republicans in Congress are skeptical that tax dollars should go towards any public media at all. Chairwoman Marjorie Taylor Greene says times have changed since Congress first signed off on its funding.
A lot has changed. The invention of the internet, for instance, and social media. It's made news and information widely available to those living in remote areas. In 2015, PBS produced Frontline, put out a documentary, Growing Up Trans, that takes viewers on an intimate and eye-opening journey inside the struggles and choices facing transgender kids and their families. This means that PBS is one of the founders of the trans child abuse industry, all while taking taxpayer money, brainwashing and transing children.
NPR and PBS together collect roughly $260 million in tax revenue per year. And President Trump has said he'd love to see those outlets lose federal funds. As of right now, House Republicans are searching for budget cuts in their budget reconciliation bill. It remains to be seen if public media funding will be on the chopping block. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Are everyday Americans on board with the idea, and do they get their news from state-funded media? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to survey the people.
You get your news from NPR or PBS or other government-funded news outlets?
Depend on those as well as independent news outlets. But yes, I do watch NPR and PBS.
No, sir. I get most of it streaming services and the internet.
I do. NPR was my mom's favorite. I still listen to it today.
Fox is where I get most of my information from.
We get most of ours from Christian radio. I do listen to a little NPR just to irritate my wife every once in a while.
Dinner conversation topics.
What do you think about the Trump administration's efforts to take government money away from outlets like NPR and PBS?
Well, he is the president, and enough people voted for him, so he pretty much can do what he'd like to do, but you have to remember, Congress has to agree to whatever he wants to do.
I don't like the idea of taking the funds away, but then again, I don't like the idea of a biased news reporting.
I think Doge is really trying to clean the garbage out and the thievery that's going on.
No, what about their First Amendment rights? People should be able to hear all voices, whether they're left, they're right, or the middle, and then you form your own opinion from all of that information.
Well, NPR's been so one-sided, I can't understand why he wouldn't want to. I didn't hear that he was going to take away.
We are proponents of downsizing big government and the efforts of Trump and Doge to expose the truth.
Do you think a government-funded outlet should lean one way or another politically?
I believe that it's the freedom that we have here, and you should respect the freedom. If you don't like it, you can go to Venezuela.
They need to present facts. They don't need a bunch of talking heads telling you what you should think one way or the other.
I think government funded should be totally neutral, absolutely neutral. It shouldn't have any sort of leaning at all.
Walter Cronkite back in the 60s, they would tell you this is what happened, this is who said what do you think? And they don't come up going, this is what I want you to think.
I don't appreciate their bias, one-sided slant all the time anyways, and if that means Trump and his administration is making some hard decisions, okay, let's see what unrolls from all of that.
Coming up, a Biden administration gun rule will continue after the Supreme Court today ruled that guns made from kits, also known as ghost guns, should be regulated. Our legal correspondent explains the ruling. And what are the implications of the High Court's ruling? The president of the National Rifle Association and a civil and criminal defense attorney join us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A near majority of the Supreme Court today upheld a rule that requires background checks on buyers of untraceable gun parts sold in kits. It held that once assembled, these so-called ghost guns are firearms. NTD's legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more of the story.
The Supreme Court voted 7-2 on Wednesday to uphold the Biden administration's rule that regulates so-called ghost guns, which can be assembled at home. Justice Neil Gorsuch, writing the opinion for the court, said in part, "The kit comes with all necessary components, and its intended function as instrument of combat is obvious. Really, the kit's name says it all: buy, build, shoot." Gun manufacturers and individuals who purchased the kits sued the Biden administration in 2022 after the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF, issued a new rule that requires serial numbers on the kits. Sellers also must perform background checks on people who purchase them. law enforcement had reported a dramatic increase in ghost guns found at crime scenes, from 1,600 in 2017 to 19,000 4 years later. Gorsuch noted in his opinion that the way Americans think about guns has changed significantly since 1968, when Congress approved the Gun Control Act. He wrote, recent years, however, have witnessed profound changes in how guns are made and sold. Justice Clarence Thomas, one of the two high court members who dissented from the opinion, said he would adhere to the words Congress enacted. He said in his dissenting opinion, Congress could have authorized ATF to regulate any part of a firearm or any object readily convertible into one, but it did not. Meanwhile, President Trump signed an order last month that requires the Attorney General to review gun regulations imposed by the Biden administration. Although this case was not a Second Amendment dispute, it's not clear how Trump will handle the ghost gun issue going forward. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
And joining us now to discuss the High Court's decision is former Congressman Bob Barr. He's the president of the National Rifle Association and a former U.S. attorney in Atlanta. We're also joined by civil and criminal defense attorney Dante Mills. He's the lead attorney and managing partner at Mills Legal. Great to have you both. Bob, starting with you, what's your reaction to the SCOTUS ruling? Surprised? Expected?
It's unfortunately not surprising. The Supreme Court, seemingly regardless of what the majority seems to be on the court, just cannot resist monkeying with firearms. So now they've gone back to a parts kit, a receiver parts kit is even a functional firearm, and saying, oh, ATF can regulate that. Pretty soon we're going to go back to even more specific, smaller parts of a firearm, and the ATF is going to claim the ability to regulate those. This is a very slippery slope that even if anti-gun groups like this decision, it's the sort of decision that can provide a precedent for the Supreme Court and the federal government to get involved in virtually any instrumentality that they want to, whether it's a gun, a car, a blender, anything.
I want to get into the nitty-gritty, but first, Dante, what was your general reaction to the ruling today?
Yeah, to push back a little bit on that, I'm not surprised by this reaction. And I will say, I don't think the Supreme Court has shown an appetite to really take further any suppression of these weapons, as far as you talk about assault rifles or anything like that. But we can't sit here and act like if you get a gun in a couple of parts that you can easily put together and then shoot, that it's not a firearm. It is. So what they're simply saying is this is something that's easily that you can easily assemble and use. So it has to be documented and tracked. You have to register for it, and you have to go through some background check, because we're not talking about small parts. We're talking about guns that essentially come ready to slap together like a Lego kit and then use, and that can be deadly. So they're not extending it beyond where we are now. They're simply looking realistically at the situation and saying these are essentially firearms. And I think it was the right thing to do, and I don't think it was a surprise.
Now, in terms of the dissent, Bob, Justice Clarence Thomas called the rule government overreach based on a series of errors, saying that firearm parts kits don't meet the federal law's definition of a firearm. Has the definition of a firearm been stretched? Will this lead to what the Justice Thomas is calling unforeseeable consequences?
Well, the consequences are not unforeseeable; they're very foreseeable. Next, the Supreme Court, the next case that comes along, it will be a different part of a firearm. A firearm is a firearm. It is a dangerous instrumentality. That's why there are, in fact, restrictions on who can purchase one and who can lawfully own and operate one. But this notion that we can regulate the individual parts that go into the manufacture of a firearm is a very dangerous, slippery slope. One could use the same argument for a motor vehicle, for example. Well, the engine could be used as an automobile if it's with all these other parts. So let's go ahead and categorize a body of a car without an engine in it, or an engine without a body. it's government overreach. Clarence Thomas is exactly right, and simply because it's firearms that groups think are so dangerous that the clear meaning of the Constitution's Second Amendment should be overly restrictive, even though they may like it, it's a very slippery slope.
And Dante, has
But let's
the
clarify
definition
here,
been
Tiffany,
stretched?
if I may, just clarify that we're talking about these kits, these ghost gun kits that people receive and can easily assemble. I think it's absolutely imperative that we protect the Second Amendment in this country. We have the right to bear arms. And again, I think the Supreme Court has not shown an appetite to really cut into that when you talk about other types of weapons that's been in front of them. And they've had the opportunity to restrict, which they hadn't. And I think the one that everybody knows about is just assault rifles that are used. And there's an argument that they should be. However, the Supreme Court has not gone that far because they do want to protect people's rights, as they should. We do know that registration for guns has been regulated now to where it's relaxed. And these states that had heavy regulation, like New York, like California, now can't do that. So it's open to more individuals. But we can't just act as if somebody receives a bag full of parts that they can easily put together, that's not a firearm. And that's all that I think the Supreme Court did, is said, okay, we know that this can easily be assembled and used, so we're determining that it's a firearm. We're not telling you a piece of metal, that a scrap metal that you can make into something, burn into something. We're not restricting that. We're talking about these kits that can be easily assembled and used and could be dangerous. So they should be registered, tracked, and you should have to go through the process.
Now, Bob, in terms of implications, now if the Trump administration keeps this Biden ATF rule, will it prevent most from 3D printing a gun? What does it take to give it a serial number?
I'm not sure I quite understood the question.
Well, one of the parts is including 3D printing gun parts as part of this ruling.
Right.
So could you see, that industry, if you want to call it an industry, getting impacted? Like what constitutes needing a serial number in this case?
Well, if it is in fact a receiver, which is a key part to a functioning firearm, the fact of the matter is that unlike other instrumentalities, a car, for example, a blender, whatever it is, those are not specifically protected against government regulation like a firearm. And treating firearms just like some other type of instrumentality or machine, I think, is very wrong. Firearms are, in fact, explicitly protected against government limitation in the Constitution. And if we start now going back and saying, well, a disassembled firearm, certain parts of it can be regulated and have to have serial numbers, it never ends. And that's what will get us into other countries that don't have a Second Amendment that heavily regulate the right to keep and bear arms, even though it isn't protected. But if government can start doing this, what now these folks want to do, then it almost makes it nonsensical to have a Second Amendment if we're going to whittle away at it so much. What is the problem with having a firearm and the default is not government regulation? That's what I'd like to know.
Dante, in terms of crime, the AP reporting on DOJ data says nearly 20,000 ghost guns were recovered at crime scenes in 2021. Will crime go down if this Biden-era rule is kept by the Trump administration?
Well, that's the hope. And I think some of the Supreme Court justices do operate on the impact of these rulings. And the hope is that the violence will go down. We can look at the data and know that ghost guns are friends for criminals. I mean, that's something that they prefer because they don't have to register for it. It's untraceable, essentially. So they have the opportunity to commit crimes without it being tracked back to them through a serial number or the need for them to register to get a firearm. So if you're looking at the laws and the application of the law, it should make our country safer. And I don't think that it really restricts anybody else. You can still go to your local gun shop. You can go to a gun show and purchase a gun legally, or purchase this kit legally if you want to try and put a gun together yourself. If you're just a gun enthusiast and that's your thing. The only person that this really restricts is someone trying to get guns illegally and have a way to use these weapons without them being traced back to them. And that's what the restriction is on. The Second Amendment isn't very important, but these things should be restricted if they can cause just as much harm as a gun that's already assembled.
And Bob, do you see this ATF ruling help keep the nation safer?
No, it's not. It's not going to make the nation safer simply by requiring that what people are referring to as a ghost gun. Another one of those made-up terms that makes something that is not evil sound evil, like an AR rifle platform being an assault rifle, a weapon of war. Even some of the Supreme Court justices fall into that charade. But it is a very slippery slope that you go down when you start saying that, well, we're regulating the firearm, but now we're going to start regulating individual parts and requiring serial numbers. Why should I have to get the government's permission, basically is what we're talking about, if I want to exercise my expressly guaranteed right under the Second Amendment to put together a firearm from various parts? Why should I have to go to the government? Why should that be the default for a right that is expressly guaranteed in the Constitution? We don't do that for other rights that aren't guaranteed expressly in the Constitution.
A lot to unpack here for sure. Bob Barr, Dante Mills, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, lawsuits, bomb threats, even death threats. One New York-based dance company shares the challenges they face and how they're targeted by the Chinese Communist Party. Fiona G has the latest update from Manhattan. And in hockey news, Alex Ovechkin's goal last night moves him to within striking distance of Wayne Gretzky's record. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty to discuss today, but let's start in the NFL, as the New York Giants have reportedly agreed to a deal with free agent quarterback Russell Wilson. Now, how does this affect the quarterback carousel, so to speak?
Well, with this reported deal, there's really one big fish remaining, that's Aaron Rodgers. And there's really one main team that's in need of a starting quarterback, that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I've said this has been a logical marriage ever since the Jets released Rodgers last month. But the Steelers, they've got a solid foundation. Mike Tomlin, the head coach, a strong defense led by T.J. Watt. Now, Rodgers complements that very well. He has the lowest interception rate in the history of the league. Just 1.4% of his throws have been picked off. Now, last year, of course, I thought he improved as the season went on. Naturally, I'm a little bit biased, but especially for a 40-year-old coming off Achilles surgery. Now, I'm not expecting like MVP numbers anymore, but the Steelers not re-signing Justin Fields or Russell Wilson seem to say something about what they think about, someone else still out there in free agency. And I don't see anybody else out there besides Aaron Rodgers. So I would think we are eventually heading for some news there soon. Just my own prediction.
Looking at hockey news, Alex Ovechkin scored again last night to move him within 6 of Wayne Gretzky's all-time record.
Yeah, Ovechkin's goals tied the game last night at 2. Unfortunately, they would end up losing in overtime to Winnipeg, and it was actually a battle between the best two teams in the league. But back to Ovechkin, that's his 36th goal this season. That's the 4th most in the NHL, despite him missing 16 games to injury, and despite the fact he's 39 years old. I mean, most players are no longer in their primes, so it's just really incredible what he's doing. But he needs 6 more goals to catch Gretzky, 11 games to do so. He's certainly on pace for that. He's on pace for like 2 every 3 games. So I think there's a good chance before the end of the season he catches him. And now his Capitals, they should have a good chance at home ice in the playoffs. A decent chance to win the Stanley Cup. So he's looking at possibly a very big couple months coming up here.
Well, moving to NBA news, the Milwaukee Bucks announced today that all-star guard Damian Lillard is out with deep vein thrombosis in his leg. Did they give a time frame for his return?
They just said he's out indefinitely. Now, obviously, just from a team perspective, it's not great timing with the playoffs coming up next month. But they've, of course, maintained Lillard's health is their #1 concern. Now, if you remember last month, San Antonio announced that Victor Wembanyama, their 21-year-old superstar, was going to be shut down for the season with deep vein thrombosis in his shoulder. Now, deep vein thrombosis is known as a blood clot in the body, so it's, of course, a serious condition. But back to Milwaukee, they are 5th right now in the Eastern Conference. they're kind of struggling. They lost 6 of their last 10 games, and their other superstar, Giannis Antetokounmpo, he's out for tonight's game because of a foot sprain. Now, if you remember in last year's playoffs, Giannis missed the entire first-round series against Indiana. Lillard only played 2 of those games, and they ended up losing the series despite having home court advantage. They certainly look like they're on pace for that again this year. Hopefully it doesn't come to that for them, though.
And shifting gears to baseball, tomorrow is opening day for every team other than the Dodgers and Cubs. What are some storylines to watch out for?
You know, just for opening day, there are actually 2 players from last year's draft who are in line to be playing tomorrow. And one of them, Ryan Johnson of the Angels, will be making a jump without playing a single game in the minor leagues. Just the 24th player in Major League history to do so. Now, he won't be a starter. He'll be coming out of the bullpen, the Angels announced. He was actually a second-round pick last year, which makes it even more amazing. Also, Houston, the Houston Astros, they're going to be having outfielder Cam Smith starting in right field. He played just 32 minor league games last year. Obviously, he must have made them count. But he came over in that trade for Kyle Tucker that was sent Tucker to the Cubs. He was a Cubs first-round pick last summer, so pretty amazing that those 2 are making the team with so little minor league experience. But also the Dodgers, they've got such a loaded roster. I think that's going to be a storyline this whole season. Shohei Ohtani should be pitching sometime this season. They also came out and got Roki Sasaki, the top international prospect, as well as Blake Snell, 2-time Cy Young Award winner. Their starting pitching last year was actually, by the end of the season, kind of in shambles. It was not considered a strength. Now this is like one of the best starting rotations in the history of the league. So that's certainly going to be a storyline. They are the overwhelming favorites to repeat as World Series champions. But you know, that's all the way in October, so we'll worry about that then.
A lot of other games first. Paul Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And for that report on Chilean performing arts, please be sure to tune into Capitol Report tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's coming up right after our show. That's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.